you all for tuning in, wherever you're calling from. Town Hall is sincerely grateful for the opportunity to invite Seattle audiences into present tense exchanges of issues, ideas, and creativity, even when we can't do it in person. Town Hall will continue to produce online content throughout the fall and into the new year, and as circumstances allow, to even host live streams from our building. In fact, I think we've got one scheduled in the next few weeks. Meanwhile, if like me, you can't seem to find enough time in front of Zoom or YouTube, know that many of our past talks are available in video or podcast form right here on our website under digital media. But back to tonight's event, which will last somewhere 45 minutes to an hour or so, including the question and answer session. Know that you can view the event both here on Crowdcast or over on our YouTube page if you want to utilize that platform's closed captioning feature. After the presentation, we'll take some of your questions using the Ask a Question field at the bottom of the screen, as well as those submitted in the YouTube chat. We can't guarantee we'll get to every question, but we'll try to get to as many as possible, so please keep them concise and we'll do what we can. Town Hall's adding new events and podcasts every day. Upcoming programs include a discussion of what constitutes a good death with Dr. Jim DeMaine, a conversation with UW's Christopher Sebastian Parker on the prospects for race relations and social justice in a Biden-Harris future. We'll look at the characteristics of strongman leaders with Ruth Ben-Ghiat, as well as upcoming appearances by Mario Livio, Michael Eric Dyson, and conversation with Robin DiAngelo, Andre Gregory, John Luther Adams, and lots of music coming up from the Hall. For more information about all of the above, visit townhallseattle.org. Town Hall's work is made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. Our civics programs are courtesy of the Real Networks Foundation, the True Brown Foundation, KUOW, and the Wyncote Foundation Northwest. But as many of you know, Town Hall is fundamentally a member-supported organization, and I want to thank all of our members watching tonight. We truly wouldn't be here without your support. And that support is important now more than ever. Like many other nonprofits, or I should say like all other nonprofits, Town Hall's feeling extraordinary stress right now. And beyond the cost of your ticket tonight, we hope you'll consider joining us or supporting us during this difficult time with a donation or even by becoming a member. Click on the donate button at the bottom of your screen anytime. And for what it's worth, our friends at the Northwest African American Museum would appreciate your support as well. You can find them at namnw.org. namnw.org. One final piece of infomercial. Tonight's subject is extraordinarily rich and dense, and our time together enough just to barely scratch the surface. So I hope you'll consider purchasing a copy of the book here tonight from our partners at LA Bay Book Company. As we like to say, keep it local, and just maybe the things that we love about this community from before the pandemic will be around for us on the other side. Les Payne was the co-founder and past president of the National Association of Black Journalists. He spent his career both as an editor and a columnist, all of his career at Newsday, the Long Island newspaper that emerged as a vigorously reported alternative to New York City's tabloids in the 1970s and 80s. He was lead reporter on a series called The Heroin Trail, a 32-part project that received a 1974 Pulitzer Prize for public service and was subsequently collected as a book by the same title. In 1990, he embarked on a nearly 30-year-long quest to interview anyone he could find who had actually known Malcolm X. His goal was ambitious, to transform what would become over 100 hours of interviews into an unprecedented portrait of Malcolm X, one that would separate fact from conjecture. Following Les Payne's unexpected death in 2018, his daughter Tamara, who had served as a principal researcher on the book, heroically completed the work. And so Tamara Payne became the book's co-author, and we're ecstatic that she's able to join us tonight alongside Violet Payne, her mother and Les Payne's wife, and Jamal Payne, her brother. They're here to discuss this incredible achievement, The Dead Are Arising, The Life of Malcolm X. It's a nonfiction finalist for the 2020 Book Award. Tonight's format's a little different. We'll begin with Violet and Jamal Payne, and then we'll throw it to Tamara. So please welcome Violet Payne and Jamal Payne.
Thank you, Ware. Good evening, and I would like to take the time now to thank Peter Miller and Bob Weil and the wonderful people at Live Right, our publisher, as well as Candace and Ware and the Elliott Bay Book Company and all the people, the wonderful people with the Town Hall Seattle and Northwest African American Museum that have worked tirelessly with us to make this event possible. I would like to formally thank you all for honoring my mother, Violet, my sister Tamara, and myself with an invitation to share with you some thoughts about my father, Les Payne, his legacy, and of course, the discussion of his recently released biography on Malcolm X, The Dead Are Rising. My brother Haile is unable to join us tonight, but he's here with us in spirit, and I'm sure he'll be watching on demand at some point in the future. I would like to state here at the top that we would not be here at this event in this celebration without the Herculean effort of my sister, Tamara, who worked along with my father on this long journey and saw this project all the way to completion. I am humbled by her tireless effort and her command of the material, as you will soon come to learn, and her determination that this project would be finished by any means necessary. Tamara, as always, I salute you. I don't want to take up a lot of time here at the top, which is why I prepared notes to keep me on task, because those that know me know I'm a middle child, and I don't know what to do with myself when I get a little bit of attention. So I'm gonna just say a few things about my father and his legacy that you may not know. So who is this man, Les Payne? Les Payne is from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. He's a Southern guy through and through. He was extremely proud to be from Tuscaloosa. Now, Tuscaloosa is a Native American word. It actually is a Choctaw word. It means black warrior. Tusca means warrior. Lusa means black. That's right. My dad is from a place called Black Warrior. So he was born in apartheid Alabama, segregated Alabama, where he was raised until the age of 12. His family, like many other black families of their time, were involved in one of the waves of the Great Migration North, where blacks left the horrors of the Jim Crow South seeking better opportunities and living conditions. He ended up in Hartford, Connecticut, where he attended high school and then went on to attend and graduate from the University of Connecticut. My dad is very well known in the New York area for writing a weekly column that ran in Newsday for some 25 years for a mostly white Long Island readership. And a lot of those readers took away from his columns that he was just this angry black man who wrote that column. This is not conjecture. I've read many, many, many bags of angry hate mail that he received over the years. And let me tell you, this is as true as truth can be. But you know what? I'll state now, he is a black man, unapologetically black. And he did write that column, but he wasn't angry. He wasn't a victim or playing the victim card. He was asserting his presence in this country and staking his claim to his birthright. He was demanding that we as African Americans stand up and claim our rightful benefits of citizenship. You see, my dad is a Vietnam veteran. He served in the Army for 6 years and earned the rank of Army Ranger Captain. He was awarded a Bronze Star among numerous other awards and commendations. He was buried with military honors. He paid the obligations of citizenship, serving this country in the military for 6 years, as many African-American men have in all of the wars and skirmishes that this country has engaged. And all he asked, and yes, demanded, was that he and his family get to reap the benefits of citizenship. My dad would tell us, his children, all the time, I paid my obligation of citizenship with my service. His brothers, my uncles, they paid the obligations of citizenship. His uncles paid the obligations of citizenship. Black men have served this country. We deserve, this is not a request or a plea. We earn the right to reap the benefits of citizenship in full. We have put in the work, and it is time to collect what is due. Now, this is what the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was talking about during his speech at the March on Washington. Quote, "We have come to Washington today with a checkmark insufficient funds, and we're here to collect," unquote. But his speech has been whitewashed and white-splained to simply be about dreaming. Martin wasn't dreaming. He was not asleep. He was woke, way before that was even a thing. He had a list of demands that America is still delinquent in addressing. This is what my mother and father taught us when we were growing up. Our Sunday breakfast table conversation was a masterclass in journalism, self-awareness, knowledge of self, self-worth, and yes, a healthy dose of Stevie Wonder, Bob Marley, Al Green, Aretha Franklin, Chuck Berry, Sam Cooke, Otis Redding, with a mix of Dr. King speeches and Malcolm X speeches. But this idea of standing up and becoming the change that we in the Black community understand that we wanted to see was a constant rallying cry to us as we were growing up. It was like his charge to us. It is our time to stand up, to walk through the door, to look America and our fellow countrymen in the eyes, to look like we belong. We proceed to walk over to the table, find a seat, and sit down. He talked about this all the time. Now, if you think about where did he get this mindset to pass along to his children, how was he able to formulate such an intense, focused approach to addressing topics like his citizenship, his standing in the country, or how African Americans should be treated in the country or newsrooms or when buying a home? I think it could be traced back to a few things. His grandmother, Annie, being a very strong influence that he spoke of often. His mother Josephine's dogged determination to find a better life for her family, including his brothers John and Joe. But exterior to the family, you can trace it back to a fateful speech at Bushnell Memorial Auditorium in Hartford, Connecticut, where he attended a speech by one Malcolm X. This speech is detailed in the introduction of The Dead Are Rising. That night, my father entered that auditorium as a Negro American, burdened by all of the trappings imbued with that imposed designation of his status in this country. However, after hearing Malcolm X speak and getting a chance to briefly meet him, his life was changed forever. So after a time, my father decided against a career in the military and chose journalism and traveled the country and the world, getting to the truth of the matter. Whatever the matter was, like the story of who the Black Panthers were, the chilling atrocities faced by Black migrant workers on Long Island, the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., tracing the flow of heroin from the poppy fields in Turkey to the veins of Black and brown young men and women in Harlem and Bed-Stuy in the 1970s New York, to tracking down the kidnappers of newspaper heiress Patty Hearst, to the apartheid evils of South Africa and the killing of Hector Peterson in the Soweto uprising. And the list goes on and on and on. He would cover these stories and use his journalistic skill and integrity to then inform the people of what was going on in their communities, in the nation, and around the world, and show how it all related back to we, the people. You see, my dad was a journalist of the highest order, and he took very serious the charge that is written in the U.S. Constitution, expressly included in the First Amendment, which is essentially, as I paraphrase here, that the freedom of the press is granted to hold the government accountable and to provide the people with the information so that the people can make informed decisions. My dad would say that this is not the job of the journalist to defend Black leaders, or any politicians for that matter, but to simply search out the truth, verify it, and lay it bare for the people. And he would quote something from his grandmother, "The people will do better when they knew better." My dad decided early in life that he would use whatever skills and craft that he could attain to help uplift his people, African Americans. My dad learned and honed his skills over a 39-year career as a writer, as an investigative journalist, and an editor to address the subject in the book that we are here to discuss tonight, The Dead Are Rising, The Life of Malcolm X. I thank you so much for giving me some time to talk about my father. And now I would like my mother to share some thoughts about her husband, my father, Les Payne, and what it means that his final masterwork is here for everyone to read. Mom?
Yes, thank you, Jamal. And it's very hard to sort of follow that. This was, I mean, you've taken everything that I was going to say, but that's beside the point. But what I tried to do was provide an environment in which Les could pursue these things. Les and I were married over 50 years, and some of it was good, some of it was, so-so, but the majority was really very, very entertaining and very, very knowledgeable. What I want to say is, or towards anything, is that our focus was in raising our kids. We would expose them to an environment with culture, technology, and their environments so that they could grow up to be a world citizen. That is where you are living, but to encompass the whole world. And this is the important thing. I think when Les and I were first married, I used to be concerned, even though I knew that his focus was, what do we do in order to help other Black people to look at society and become better citizens and more involved. And I was always concerned that in that pursuit, that we did not have a reoccurrence of a reconstruction of the 1870s. And that was very important. And it drove me and Les to to really pursue and to have a lifestyle where we can. I think that the Malcolm X book sort of helps us come to a point to see that maybe we can get through this. I want to thank you all for inviting us as a family to be on this broadcast. This is a very important book, I think. And I think that it helps to frame the environment in which people sort of grow up and evolve from where they were born to where they did end up in life and in their thought process. So I would like to turn this back over to Jamal for the continuation of the program. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Mom. And, and I'm glad that we're able to, to kind of get Dad into the room with us, and so that we can, understand who we're talking about. And so now let's get to the meat of the discussion about this National Book Award finalist. And so I would like to introduce you all to my sister, Tamara Payne, who's going to join us. And we're going to have a little conversation about, this book and the process of how we got here. And, so when Tammy joins us here, we'll get to it. And I want to welcome my sister to the to this program here with her. And
Am I supposed to
we're waiting for her video to show up here. And
Tammy.
We're having a slight issue with Tamara. You need to refresh your page.
Okay. All right, so we have a little technical issue, which is fine, and but what we wanted to, what we want everybody to know about this work, and obviously it's, it is such a bittersweet moment because my dad would be so in this space, like he was so involved in every part of this process, and and he was so masterful in it, but as masterful as he was in the investigation and in the reporting and in the writing and in the editing process, he would have been even more masterful in this part where he talks and he gets to engage with readers and potential readers. And, and so we just hope that everybody gets a chance to pick this up and just look at, this is a labor of love, for my dad. It's his final work, and and he worked on it for a long time, and there was a lot of hours and blood, sweat, and tears that were put into this, and and it covers a lot of ground, about American history and about Malcolm X, and we'll get into that a little bit here tonight. And of course, as Ware said at the top, we're not going to be able to go into every topic in the book, and we're not going to be able to cover every issue, but we're going to try to, we're going to mix it up, and and hopefully we can engage and pique your interest so that you will want to, engage and and purchase the book. And I believe that it makes a perfect gift. My birthday was in October, and my sister's birthday was on Friday. So we've been telling many of our friends to purchase the book. That'll be a perfect gift for us to purchase the book and purchase it for many other people. And and that's what we're going for. And I think we are here. Here we go. My sister Tamara is
reconnecting,
joining us and reconnecting. And this is the new technology, and we're going here. So welcome, Tammy, to the stream. Welcome back, I should say. And
hi, everybody.
So we're just going to get into it. Tamara, can you talk about how this project came to be? Like, did our father ever really want to write this book about Malcolm X? What did he hope to accomplish with the story that he ends up telling?
Dad, as a journalist, he pursued stories that were interesting and had new information. He was not interested in telling the stories or his version or his opinion about what was already known. So as a journalist, and most journalists who are true to the craft, they're looking for what's new and about things, whether we think we know everything. If we don't have all the information, we don't know everything. So that's what was the driving matter here and why he chose it. But walking into the topic itself, my father, our father, you know, he respected Malcolm. He admired Malcolm. He went to go see him speak. He would read the autobiography every couple of years, as you know, and we would play the speeches for us growing up, often in the weekends. But he never felt that he needed to write a biography about Malcolm, because he felt that we had everything we needed from Malcolm's autobiography and from the speeches. And so he never thought about it. But what happened was he happened to have the opportunity to speak to the brothers. He met one brother first through his friend, Walter Evans, and he met with him, he spoke with him, got a story, and he was amazed at what he learned. He learned a little bit about their childhood, what the parents were like, what it was like in their household when they were 5 and 6 years old growing up. You know, not just what the kind of meals they eat, the stories that their mother told, that the mother sang to them, you know, in French sometimes. So Dad was like, I've never heard this. And he was processing, and he was realizing, like, and how this had affected and impacted Malcolm, you know. And so he came back to New York, and he spoke with Gil Noble, who was his colleague and journalist, a fellow journalist here in New York, who had a show. And Gil Noble also admired Malcolm, said, which brother did you speak to? And he said, the brother you really need to speak to is Wilfred. But the brother Dad had spoken to at that point was Filbert. So Dad went back to Detroit area, Michigan, and met Wilfred. And he heard another story. Now, the interesting thing here is that Filbert was 2 years older than Malcolm, and Wilfred was 6. So there's a gap here, and but they were still very close. And Wilfred, as we find out through the book, and as Dad learned from them, is that Wilfred and Malcolm were best friends, and were best friends until the end of Malcolm's life. So he was somebody Malcolm confided into throughout his life. And when he was making decisions, learning new things, even getting into trouble, you know, it was Wilfred that he confided into. And so when Dad learned about this, it was about the family. It was the understanding, you know, that we are not who we are. Like, Malcolm has always been presented to us fully formed and angry, but nobody talked about how he got there, and what impacted him. And we don't walk through life by ourselves. We walk through life as in conjunction with incidents that happen to us and our families who raise us and surround us. And so when Dad saw that, he wanted to learn more. And then as a journalist, learning more means starting with the family and talking to those who are willing to talk. And then they talk about friends and neighbors. And then he goes and finds those people. And I was part to the process of helping him find these people and talking to these people, listening to the interviews. I transcribed a lot of these interviews too, but that's getting a bit into more in the process. But this is how the story grows about why Dad starts from not wanting to do a book about Malcolm to finding that there's an interesting story here, and then just starting the pursuit of it. And then the story kind of takes a life of its own, you know, and here we are.
So, you know, continuing on that path, like, talk about some of the interesting stories that Wilfred and Filbert shared, and, you know, some of the, you know, people that were early on and close to him in his life. You know, I mean, like, as the book opens up, you know, I mean, we have a story that's given to us that Malcolm couldn't possibly have given us. So just talk a little bit about that.
Correct, but Malcolm had actually already given us that story in his own autobiography.
We get a little bit more color.
But he does open it because he knew that this incident happened, and the incident is that the Klan in Omaha, Nebraska, visit the Littles' household. Earl, their father, was not there, and his mother was with their three children at the time. She had Wilfred, who was about 6, who she had Filbert, who was a little baby, and she had the second born was Hilda, and she was a toddler, and she's pregnant with Malcolm. So she's being harassed by the local Klan member because why? Because of their Garveyites. They had joined the Universal Negro Improvement Association. They didn't join it after they met. They actually joined it separately were going to meetings. They met in Montreal, they being Louise Little and Earl Little, and that's how they met. And they were attracted to the actions and the activities of Marcus Garvey and his movement, which was about helping Black people deal with the race situation, embracing who they are, and being self-sufficient, building their own communities, building their own businesses, and embracing who they are. And he did it in many ways. You know, he would have speeches and meetings which they would organize each other. And you know, Earl being smart and determined and strong and, you know, a capable person, he was very interested in organizing people. He liked to do that. And so what they did early on, they settled, when they first met, they settled in Philadelphia, but then they moved out to areas in the Midwest where there were not as many Black people, and certainly Black communities that were not fully organized. And so they went to spread the word of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, and Marcus Garvey's principles. So that's the setting. And what Dad learns is the details more about that. He learns that, for example, that Marcus Garvey visited the household when the children were younger, and they remember meeting Marcus Garvey.
And Wilford actually describes what he looked like, right?
Huh?
Wilford actually
describes what Marcus Garvey looks like, and also, you know, he talks about his father defending Marcus Garvey during his trials, and even writing, you know, the president at the time to have Marcus Garvey freed. He also, you know, but also in organizing, as he was not there in the opening scene, because he was a few towns away organizing people, you know, in that area. But what we find out from them is that they had a close-knit family, and it was a farm family. They worked hard, and that Louise, who is more educated than Earl, she really was about her kids being smart and learning studying their lessons. And she also spoke, you know, a few languages. She spoke French, and she would sing to them in French, and she would help them learn their lessons. And she was also the one in the household who really kind of was translating and conditioning her kids into being Black in America and accepting what that entails and what that means. And even in dealing with confrontation from white classmates and white neighbors. So I'd like to read a little bit from the book, just to kind of give an idea of both Louise and Earl. First, I'm going to start with Louise about conditioning the children. In the story of Little Black Sambo, published in 1899 by the British writer Helen Bannerman, was a standard children's reader of Pleasant Grove, which was the school that the children attended in Lansing. The illustrations of the dark Indian child caused derisive snickering among whites, but the pickaninny slur, along with the unrestrained banding about of the term nigger, repulsed the little children, who were taught at home to disparage such put-downs of the Black race. As the taunts escalated, it was their mother, Louise, who conditioned Malcolm and his siblings not to overreact to the racial slurs. We didn't like being called a nigger, Wilford said, but we would try to downplay it. My mother always told us that you can handle racial slurs in a way where you can make them continue, or you can let them think they're not hurting you. She would give us an example. If you're throwing darts at a dartboard, there's a satisfaction you get when you hit the target. When you miss it, you get another feeling. Well, she said, it's the same with white people. When they're throwing darts at you by things they say and do, but if they don't hit the target, then they won't get that satisfaction, and eventually they'll quit. And usually that's the way it works. This psychological training for resistance to racial provocation was conditioned into the behavior of young Malcolm and his siblings. Their behavior earned grudging respect among a growing number of whites in their neighborhood, despite, and in some cases because of, their adherence to the Garveyism. And the other thing I like to put in here, read, and this is all from the chapter called The Anchor is Lost. That was page 74 that I read from. And now I'm going to page 79 for those who actually have the book and want to read along. All the children agreed that even though their father was not as given to education as their mother, Reverend Little was dead set on instilling a work ethic that, as a preacher organizer, he possessed a sharp ear for glibness. In this latter case, he likely had a penchant for young Malcolm's gift for expressing himself verbally and otherwise. So that's giving you a hint about Malcolm's personality even at this age. And we're talking about 5 and 6. Earl would take young Malcolm with him on proselytizing trips for Marcus Garvey. It was only me that our father would take to the UNIA meetings, which he held quietly in different people's homes, Malcolm noted in the autobiography. The special primal paternal bond was the enduring essence of Malcolm's childhood imprinting. Even before he reached the first grade, he was impressed with the potency of leadership as demonstrated by his father in UNIA meetings. I remember seeing big shiny photographs of Marcus Garvey that were passed around from hand to hand, Malcolm wrote. Despite Garveyism, imprisonment, and deportation, Reverend Little was highly respected as a regional UNIA president, and Malcolm recalled his father closing the house meetings with 24 or so followers by chanting, "Up, you mighty race, you can accomplish what you will." So this is what was in their little household and gives you a sense of what they were imprinted with at a young age.
And so we're given this kind of detail and information to content that, I mean, it probably isn't in the best interest of Malcolm to necessarily share that, but I mean, we're able to share this and much more and to go into some of the things that are surrounding young Malcolm and young Wilfred and Filbert. Now, before we get more into this, and you're showing the depth and knowledge that you have, can you talk a little bit about like how you joined this project and how you were involved? And I mean, you're listed as the primary researcher, but just to talk about from a daughter's perspective, how this project came to be and your relationship to it and to Dad as you worked on it.
Yeah. As you know, well, when I first got involved with this, I had just come back from China. I was an English teacher in Shandong province for a couple of years. And when I came back, I was thinking about what I wanted to get into. Now, Dad, when I was visiting during one of the holidays before I had finished my tenure there, Dad had
Shandong province was in China. You didn't say that.
Shandong province in China.
Yeah.
Dad had interviewed the two brothers, and he was processing, and he couldn't stop talking about it. And I would ask him questions because it just sounded really interesting what he had heard. I hadn't heard the actual interviews at that point, but I was just listening to Dad go on and on and on about it. And this is in 1990. And then fast forward to when I came back home in the summer of 91, Dad at that point was negotiating and may have already gotten a contract to start writing the book. And he said, and I wasn't even thinking, I knew that he was probably going to do this. And I get that was a great idea, but he brought me on because he said, you should work with me on this. And I said, that's okay. And I was thinking at that time of going to graduate school and pursuing my other endeavors, but I really also wanted to work with my dad. I was interested in journalism, but also I knew Dad. I knew his career. I mean, he was.
You studied English in college. Studied English in college, right? So.
Yeah. And I already had a college degree, but the idea of working with Dad, though, particularly to watch his process and work, is it was fascinating, and it worked for me, and so that's what I did. So I put my graduate school career ideas off on the shelf and just worked with him, and this became my graduate program. And we worked together on this for 28 years. Now, he would always argue that we didn't work on this full time, nothing else to do. And that's true. I mean, I took on other jobs. He, of course, was working at Newsday and writing his column and managing reporting teams on important stories. But also worked, he was part of a weekly television show called Sunday Edition. He was part of the Reporters Round Table there, where people, would see him. So he was out there. People who knew of him. He was practicing his craft, but he was also at the same time working on this book. And what that entailed for us was, in the beginning, we just started by combing documents, combing the libraries. not for speeches, but for any information we could find about Malcolm, particularly in places that he lived, for example, Omaha. And I remember going out to Wisconsin, the University in Madison, and University of Wisconsin in Madison. I went to their, libraries. And at that time, a lot of these libraries, were not connected. So we actually did have to travel to different institutions to do research. And that's what I, was doing. And it was, it was really interesting. I was just starting with newspaper articles, looking at even people who were doing theses, to see if there was anything interesting that they came across. But so you're combing this stuff, and then of course, Dad, there were a lot of people in the Michigan area who knew Malcolm, and they were still there. Plus, the Nation of Islam, that he was part of. Their headquarters was in Chicago, but they had a very active community in Detroit, and there were people who knew there. Malcolm was part of that community also, so he wanted to meet with people who knew them. They were around, they were willing to talk, and and so we went on several, trips there, and we met with people. We met with people who were in the actual nation, who were part of Elijah Muhammad's family, who were still leaders of the Nation of Islam at that time in the 90s, to learn about the history and what the Nation of Islam, how did it come to be? What were those early days like? And we write about that in the book. We also, met with people who went to school with Malcolm in Mason, and we also met with John Davis Jr., who I thought was a wonderful person. He was, Malcolm's running mate when after his father died, and the family, it was depression, and Malcolm was older. He was starting his teen years, so he's like 12 or 13 at this point, and John Davis was a little bit older, but they were running mates, and Malcolm was tall, and people thought he was older than he was. And they would skip school together, and John Davis kind of told us about that. And it was interviewing these people, and there's a difference when you're going to institutions and reading documents and reports and other books. And we of course we combed all of these, these things too, as well as FBI papers. But the real story was also in talking to people. I mean, this is like, as Dad would call it, how journalists kill their own meat. They find their sources, and they find out what they know, and those sources can tell them, that there's this other person you should talk to. And it's not simply just following what the source is saying. You have to also check back what was known about what this source's story was, and verifying that. And this is where the investigation becomes involved. So this is different than other biographies that are written by scholars and historians. They're not doing this is journalism, and it's just a different discipline. It's a different discipline. It's just a different approach to this. And Dad is a journalist to his core, and that was the way he was going to write this book. So. But I was brought in, and we worked closely together. We were already close before that, but I really was learning how to do journalism, how to prepare for doing interviews, how to approach people that you don't know and get them to talk to you. And, in different ways of doing that, but also being prepared. How do you prepare to talk to a person and find out, what you're looking for? And you have to stay on top of it. It was amazing to watch how Dad could compartmentalize things, and he could be it was amazing how he compartmentalized, because he'd be on the phone talking about Bosnia and talking about friendly fire in Iraq, but he's also working on making sure we're okay. And then he's like, okay, now where are we in this book? And he kept a really good outline of what this book was going to be, and this outline did change, but that's what kept him kind of focused on how this story was going to unfold. So that was the process, and our relationship just became deeper because it was another layer.
Great. So carrying on with that. Go ahead, Mom.
No, I was just saying that it was very important to retain his voice, the lyrical and poetic way that he wrote.
Right, exactly. But carrying on with what you were talking about, Tammy, of the cast of characters that Dad talked to, from Malcolm's life, Can you share some, a little bit more about how Malcolm's origin story now, it kind of changes, or it just has a little bit more form to it. And what I mean by that is Malcolm shared his origin story with us in the autobiography. Without giving away too much, can you share just a little bit more of like what we've added to this conversation? Because this is not an end. This is a continuation of a story of who this man is and like what new is there.
Well, I think we need to first also just make it clear that when Malcolm was setting out to do the autobiography originally,
Right.
it was going to be a PR piece really for Elijah Muhammad's teachings in the Nation of Islam.
Right.
But during that time, he fell out and he split from the Nation of Islam. And also, the person he was working with, Alex Haley, and this is not news. I mean, this has been discussed, I know.
Right.
He was not really interested in doing the PR piece for the Nation of Islam. So he was always trying to work on Malcolm to do his own story because he found him more fascinating. And Malcolm really was resistant to doing that. But when he split from the Nation, then it was like he had to tell his own story. And he also kind of wanted control of that story. But then it becomes, and what we say about autobiographies is that the subject, if they're writing their autobiography, they're putting out the story that they want people to see. And even if they go into, the deep depths of things, it's still what they're willing to share, and people are different in how they do that. So there are a lot of things that Malcolm, he mentions his family in the autobiography, but he mentions all of his siblings, but we don't really get a sense of all their personalities. Right. And here we're getting a little bit more sense of what the personalities in that household of growing up for Malcolm. So it's not changing or correcting it. It's just filling in more of the picture. Right. That is Malcolm and who he is. But the other thing that we have to understand, when Dad wanted to do this book, he didn't simply want to just write the book about Malcolm and just, his family, but he also wanted to talk about the world Malcolm was born into. Because this answers that whole thing about Malcolm is presented to us as angry and fully formed. How did he get there? And one of the things I like to talk about is also when we talk about his hustling days, and yes, he did everything. He did all those things that they said he did, maybe even more so.
And that he said he did.
But let's also put in context. We are now able to contextualize all of this. He was a teenager. He goes into jail at age 20. He's not 25, he's 20. So there's a different, maturity that he is at that point, but then also the maturity of that time and what people were going through and what everybody else was also doing. How out of the normal is everything that he was doing. And I think a lot of times when people talk about how he did all these horrible, and they describe them as horrible things, I just say that these are things that he did, but they take it out of the context of, well, you know what? A lot of people were doing that because everybody was struggling during that time.
Right. We're coming out of the depression, and
we're coming out of the depression. Everybody's struggling. Everybody's trying to make a way, white, black, and otherwise. So, everybody's struggling. So, and we need to contextualize all of that. But just like we need to contextualize that while people like to talk about Malcolm being anti-white, but the society was anti-black.
Right.
And so I talk about that only like these are the things that we're really bringing out in this book. And we're using the interviews and talking to people because they give us their experiences of how they arrived, either interested in being in the Nation of Islam or growing up, like the McGuire family. We did talk to the members of the McGuire family who were the other West Indian family in Lansing, and we're close to and they were close to Louise Little because she was from Grenada. And it was just really interesting just hearing how they related to each other because they're Caribbean and the accents and the food, but also culturally, because other Black people kind of looked differently at them. They weren't, there was differences and they kind of had separations in that too. But it was really interesting hearing that. It was really, John Davis, to me, Jr. was probably the most interesting person to hear from of his pre-adolescent days, because he was also Black. He grew up in Mississippi, and a situation happened where he ended up hitting a white man, and this white man basically went to the crowd, and they wanted to lynch him. They were looking for him. So his family hid him and got him up to Michigan, and eventually. And so these are stories, that happened. This is what I mean, that society was anti-Black because Jim Crow laws said that if you shouldn't be looking white people in the eye. You have to step off the sidewalk when they come and pass, and he didn't. And they can hit you, and if you die from them knocking you off and you lose your balance and you hit your head, they will not be charged for that. You should have gotten out of the way. So this is what I mean, that it was anti-Black. And so these are responses. They move up north because there are more opportunities, but then you find in the north that there are other issues. Black people aren't supposed to own land in certain areas. The exclusion clauses that are on real estate, on land ownership. And so, again, they don't say don't sell to, Italians, don't sell to Irish. They say don't sell to Black people. Right. So that's anti-Black. And land ownership is, one of the most basic forms of building your wealth. So you're blocking that. So these are the stories that we're hearing from people to talk about that time. And let's also understand that Dad, as you mentioned, he grew up in Jim Crow South, and the family moved up to Hartford, Connecticut. So he understands this. He's understanding this from a first-hand basis. It's not like you and I doing this, which would be more of a second-hand basis, because it's going to be based on his stories and the stories of our aunts and uncles and our mother, and then reading about it. Because we didn't have Jim Crow experiences in our lifetime, as set up the way our parents did. Now, does that mean that we didn't experience racism? Absolutely not. But it just means it's different. And that these are the filters, these experiences, these are his filters that he is pushing all this information through and writing this story. So he has an understanding of what's going on in America at this time, which makes this even more important because he can understand the context of which Malcolm was navigating his life while he was here.
So I want to make the announcement now that we are accepting questions, and there are people who should submit some questions in the Ask a Question box. And we have a question, and I think it's pretty interesting. And, and like I said at the top, we're not going to have ability to talk about everything in the book. There's so much information. It's so rich. So I just hope you get a chance to read it. But I think this is a pretty good question from Spider Kedelski. I had the extraordinary experience of being in the Senate gallery in 1964 when first MLK Jr. entered, and then later Malcolm X. Later they met outside, and there's a picture of that has been seen all around, and the first and only time that they met. Can you talk about the relationship between Malcolm and the leaders of the, quote unquote, nonviolence leaders of the civil rights movement? But, Malcolm in relation to the nation and them, and then when he left the nation and his relationship with the other civil rights organizations and their leadership.
I like to always, when it comes to that relationship, I like to refer to the comment, the quote, actually. And I've heard Malcolm say this, and I've heard Martin say this. And that is a quote about segregation and racism, but segregation, really. Segregation, it imbues the segregator with a false sense of superiority, and the segregatee a false sense of inferiority. And that's not a direct quote, but that's basically what he was saying. And so Martin and the civil rights groups, their goal was to work on the segregator and changing their mind about segregation and Black people as American citizens in this country. And they did that, for example, with the success of having the bus boycott in Alabama and being able to cripple the bus companies to the point that they said, okay, we're going to have to change the rules. So what they were working was the actual laws. So that would give us recourse in dealing with these things that happen against us. If it's a law, that means you're breaking the law. And that's what Martin and the civil rights groups were working on. Malcolm, through Garveyism, Marcus Garvey, they were focused more on the mindset of Black people, African Americans, in America. And that is dealing with this false sense of inferiority that we have basically internalized over time, and because of the power structure. When the power structure says, in order to have a job, you have to have, certain requirements, and it could be college degree, master's degree, whatever. You have to be able to dress the part and wear your hair a certain way. And these things have been, communicated to us over the time. And yet, even when we do that, we're still either not given the opportunity to have those jobs, or we're not promoted, or we're not allowed to have the responsibilities of other people who had that same position. And so it affects us and how we see ourselves. Also, when we can't buy land, like we start limiting ourselves. We feel like we can't live in certain neighborhoods. We don't understand why, and we start to internalize that there's something wrong with us. And so Malcolm was dealing with that mindset, and he's dealing with that, his background, his family's background with Marcus Garvey and what they were taught in the household, but also the Nation of Islam, which also is kind of based on Marcus Garvey's principles too. Especially when they're setting up their temples, they're setting up their businesses, they're setting up their schools, all of these things. These are all in line with what Marcus Garvey was promoting. So Malcolm, it was a natural place for the little family to kind of fall into and work with. And Malcolm was really promoting that, and that's what he was working with. So they were working on two separate tracks, but they were both about freeing it up so that African Americans can live and thrive in this country, without being pushed off the sidewalk or knocked dead or shot in the back, by policemen. That these things should not be happening just simply, because of the color of our skin. And people will, of course, argue, but our treatment is not the same. When even if we commit a crime or are thought to have committed a crime, the treatment of Black people are 6 times more likely to be arrested than white people. This is anti-Black.
Right.
So Martin's dealing with that part of it, and Malcolm and the Nation, they were dealing with really the other side of that. And that really was what Malcolm was doing. The Nation, they were just wanting to they wanted their own country, they wanted their own state, their own laws. They wanted to be separate. They weren't interested in integrating. So
we go in, and it goes into that a little bit in the book. And I just want to get to 2 more questions before we end this. As we wind down, what do you think Dad would want people to know from this project, like in particular Malcolm's life in relation to the history of this country and our current times that we're living in today? Like, what would he want people to walk away once they put this thrilling, nonfiction National Book Award finalist book down? What would he want them to walk away with?
A much more nuanced view of Malcolm. And he would want, one of the things that just really became clear to him as he was working on this was the importance of Malcolm, period, as an American citizen, as an American, person. And he wanted people to really see Malcolm and what he really was doing this nuanced way, not this I've heard terms used demagogue on Malcolm, right? They would describe him as a demagogue, and Malcolm was not. So he would like people to come away from that, but also just understand, there's a reason why Malcolm's important if people around the world are turning to him who aren't Black people. Because Malcolm understood struggle and oppression, and people could understand the way he analyzed that. It speaks to people, not just here in America, but all over the world. And he wants people to see that this is important, and he is important, but understand who this person is, and what the world that he navigated, but also understand the world that he navigated.
Right. So this would be the last question. We're down on time. This hour has gone so fast, and you've given us so much information about this great topic and this great book. But what I would like you to talk about along the same lines that you just talked about is what do we learn from what is in this book of where Malcolm was in that last year of his life, as far as his ideas on an international basis, but where we were as a country and our position in it. Like, can you share something about where Malcolm, what his position was, in that last year.
Malcolm's view that in that last year that we should find other tactics, and he was always looking at different ways of analyzing the tactics here in this country, and he would still be doing that today, and not just doing the same old things all the time. He was the one that came up with the idea of taking the Black fight for civil rights to the international level and to the United Nations. That was his idea, and he did that in discussions at a secret meeting with civil rights leaders. Martin Luther King wasn't part of that meeting, but he did have a representative at that meeting, and the FBI was there. And so he came up with this idea at that meeting. And I think
this is
that
in the book, right? We discussed this in the book, what's going on, right?
Discussed in the book. But what he was looking at really was that it's the world that we need to be concerned about. And he would also want Black people to be connected more with the African continent and the people there, sharing our what we know and our experiences and strengthening that way, and making a stronger connection with that. But he would be analyzing what is going on in this world, and he would be very critical, and he was critical of all the groups that he was in, just as he was critical of the Nation of Islam at that time, but he was also critical of Islam. But one thing I will also say about Malcolm was that a lot of people have said that Malcolm, on his issues with women, he believed that women's role in the world is important. And he said to the Islamic Center himself, this is also in the book, that a country's only as strong and advanced as much as they educate their women. And if they don't educate their women, they're going to be backwards. And he was very strong on that. But also at the end, he was very strong that, yes, he was a Muslim and he embraced Sunni Islam, but he also was not going to let go of the struggle of at that time, 22 million Black people in America. He was not letting that go. That was still his major cause. And he was coming up with new ways of doing that. And obviously he was becoming more effective. But the thing is also, in traveling, he was learning about other countries, other groups of people and their struggles and how their struggles were similar to our struggles. And he was listening to that and he was learning about that. But he didn't finish learning his stories, those stories and those lessons, because he was killed. So that last evolution, where he was going with that, we don't fully have that because he was taken from us. And everybody can talk about where he was going and what they think. But the thing is that it was not it was not completed. But where he was, though, he was very open and listened to where people were coming from. Malcolm was an excellent listener. He would travel into places he hadn't been to before and listen to how people were struggling. Now, he had studied a lot about other countries and what they were doing and their relationships, particularly America's involvement in their countries. And at that time, Iran was one. And that was when he was talking with Iranian students, and he was saying that you need to monetize your minerals, your resources for you. And the Iranian students were like, nobody's ever spoken to us like that. Malcolm spoke to them that way. So he was talking, he was interacting, but he was learning. He was still learning about that. And where he would have gone with that, I think that it's a travesty that we don't have him here to see where he could have gone with that. Because now the world probably would have gotten a lot smaller, a lot faster, if he kept doing that. But today, it is a lot smaller today because of the internet, and we're able to get this information and converse and talk with people and learn about that. And I think that we have to learn to take advantage of that and learn from each other. And I think Malcolm would have been really part of that movement, but he also would have been part of the movement of making sure that we hold the powers that be accountable for the rules that they should be upholding that are in place.
Right. And now we're coming to the end, but I want, as a good son, to give my mother the last word on what we will say, what she thinks that my father would want people to know and what she wants people to know from this book after you go and purchase it, at Elliott Bay booksellers and all other places where books are sold. Mom, take us home. And thank you so much for the time.
I just hope that you all read the book It is very well. It is an easy read, even though it is a very large, 130, 7 pages. But it is so much information there, and I think that you would enjoy it.
Yeah.
Please, as a gift. And I want to thank the Seattle area for their support in this. And I must admit that I've been to Seattle and I loved it there. And I especially love the North America, the North American,
The Northwest African American Museum.
Northwest African Museum. And so I just hope that you will purchase the book as a gift to family members, to friends, or to people that you think need it.
And of course, Tammy wants you to read it. Thank you so much. Thank you for the time. And I turn it back over to the Town Hall Seattle and Ware and Candace. And thank you so much for the time.
Thank you.
Uh-oh.
There we go.
Here we go.
Yeah, and I want to just thank you all so much for presenting with us tonight. I'm so glad that even though we couldn't be together, that we could still have you and invite you to speak to our audience. It's really been an honor and super inspiring to hear you talk about, the legacy of these two great men, your father and also Malcolm X. So thank you so much for your work.
Hopefully dropped a lot of breadcrumbs and jewels for people to find their way to some great information.
Yeah, I definitely learned a lot that I didn't know. So thank you so much.
I hope that we answered questions that your audience has, or if they are still sending in questions, that you may forward them to us.
Sure. Yeah, they are here. There's a couple in there, but and you're welcome to comment on those after we close as well. But I can also send them. That's definitely possible. I want to thank everybody for watching as well. Thank you for joining us tonight. If you want to see more Town Hall events, you can follow this Crowdcast channel by clicking on the follow button in the top corner. You can also always check out our online calendar. Please buy the book through Elliott Bay, support the local economy. You can do that by clicking on the link on the stream that you're watching, either the buy the book button here on Crowdcast or over on YouTube. It is linked in the chat. So thank you again so much. Thank you all, Violet, Jamal, and Tamara for joining us tonight. And
thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
I hope the storm isn't too bad now.
No, it subsided. It's fine.
Oh, good.
No,
It
swept through here.
Great. Okay. Well, have a great night. And thank you.
You too.
Good night, Seattle.
Good night, Seattle.
Mhm.